Get ready for Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, the 30-minute show packed with an hour's worth of information, bringing you familiar guests on important issues such as immigration, education, the Middle East, culture, religion, and the changing worldviews of Americans and the world. You've seen her on Fox News, you've read her on the World Wide Web. Now here's Sharon.
For such a time as this.
Freeing the minds of the brainwashed masses.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of Changing Worldviews today. Good news and bad news. Bad news first. The majority of Americans say the current government shutdown is causing a crisis or major difficulties for them, a higher percentage than the 1995 shutdown. Good news. U.S. Naval SEALs Team 6 captured 2 high-value al-Qaeda targets over the weekend, and serious chemical weapons are beginning to be destroyed. Bad news, but a former Syrian general is warning that he doesn't believe that Assad will destroy all their chemical weapons and has hidden reserves. Good news. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu was not afraid to warn the Assembly of World Leaders in his UN speech last week, saying that Iran's President Rouhani can't be trusted. He described him as a wolf in sheep's clothing, quote, a wolf who thinks he can pull the wool over the eyes of the international community. We're going to be looking at these issues and more this week on the show with our guests, such as Walid Shoebat, former PLO terrorist, now Christian and author. My interview with him today on how current events tie into Endtimes events. That coming up right after this.
The man sitting next to me can certainly tell us he was a terrorist.
A former PLO terrorist.
A terrorist now living in the U.S.
Former Muslim terrorist.
And raised a Muslim.
Fighting for the justice of Israel.
We have to stand with Israel. Judea is the heart of the Jewish people.
Walid Shoebat.
Walid Shoebat. Walid Shoebat.
One word caused me to believe in the truth of the Bible, and that's the word Israel.
The problem is a massive racist ideology that is growing throughout the Middle East and the Muslim world.
Walid Shoebat for 17 years, ever since converting to Christianity after his wife challenged him to show her all the corruptions in the Bible when he was trying to convert her to Islam. Since 2003, Walid has been speaking out on television, radio and the internet concerning the threat of Islam, reaching millions with the truth.
You're listening to Changing Worldviews with Sharon Hughes, commentary on the news that's void of spin, but never short on passion. Now, here's more with Sharon.
Today, with co-host Myles Weiss and guest Walid Shoebat, the former PLO terrorist who has come out with a new book, God's War on Terror. And I have so many questions for Walid and the things that he raises in his book about Islam's Mahdi or their Messiah and what the Bible actually warns about this. And I'm sure, Myles, that you have questions too.
I do, and I'm so grateful to be speaking with Walid today because he has one of the most cogent arguments for the role of Islam in the end times that I've ever heard anywhere.
Well, I know that he says that he found the Bible is not simply a book on personal devotion, as many think, but a roadmap of details concerning the future. He's a former PLO terrorist who was born into an anti-Semitic family. Walid's grandfather was a Muslim leader and a friend of Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and a notorious friend of Adolf Hitler. His great-grandfather was a close associate of the leaders who led the Palestinians against Israel, and Walid himself lived through and witnessed not only the Six-Day War, but later himself was involved in many anti-Israel riots and acts, and eventually was imprisoned for incitement and violence against Israel. He then came to the United States and worked as a counselor for an Arab student organization at a college and engaged again in anti-Israel activities. Well, that's no longer what he does today. He is a former PLO terrorist. He's written several books, including Why I Left Jihad and Why We Want to Kill You, and now God's War on Terror. Walid, so glad that you could be with us. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been a long time.
Thank you for
having me.
You say in your book it's an Islamic coalition against Israel instead of a Western coalition, which is the common thought. Would you explain this to us?
Well, most evangelical Christians believe that the war that the Bible spoke about is going to emanate from the European Union. I argue it's going to be an Islamic Middle Eastern Union. Fact is, today, if you look at a country like Turkey, which I talk about a lot, basically they are constructing a Middle Eastern alliance. And Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey himself, is saying that 1.5 billion Muslims are waiting for the Turkish government to rise. So we're looking at an old wounded beast that was wounded by the West. And this is why Westerners don't understand why Islamists want to kill them. And the reason is because they view that it was the Christian West that gave a crushing blow to the rise of Islam when the Ottoman Empire fell under the war that was commenced by the conflict in that region when Great Britain basically dismantled the caliphate and dismantled the Islamic Sharia law in Turkey. And so Muslims worldwide view that as a crushing blow. And this is the beast that wants to rise itself to basically fulfill what's been said in the Bible. Who is like the beast who can make war with him? And when you look at the text in the Bible, in fact, this has been my main critique of Western analysts of the prophetic elements in the Bible. And I asked the question, when you look at the Bible, you can never find a single statement in the Bible in which the Bible mentions nations that God deals with in the ends of times that are not today Muslim. In other words, if you look at all the literal references in the Bible of nations that God deals with, all of them are Muslim. The problem comes that when Western scholars and students of the Bible look into the book of Revelation and look at the allegoric reference and extract from the allegoric reference a kind of wrong conclusion without examining first what's been said in the rest of the Bible, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Joel, those are important parts of the puzzle. Many analysts have viewed Islam to be the Antichrist. Hosea Litch, Sir Robert Anderson, Jonathan Edwards, from the most respected scholars of Christendom in the past have supported the view that Islam is the Antichrist. So what I'm trying to do is revive the Western concept that had existed in the past and say these guys were right, they had something to say. The modern analysts really have began this problem, and we need to revisit what has been said for long ago.
Yeah, I think because, with the one world government, the one world system, the mark of the beast, because of the economic things that are involved and so forth, perhaps have lost sight of what you're saying. Well, which Muslim nation is going to lead this coalition?
Well, I believe it's Turkey. In fact, if we look at the words of Jesus Christ himself, those are significant. We need to pay attention. He says, Pergamus, thou art the seat of Satan. Pergamus is in Turkey. No one can dispute that. However, the modern analysts have basically finagled this verse to say, well, it must be speaking of the altar of Pergamus that was moved to Berlin. Well, this doesn't say altar of Pergamus. What you will find is that many of the Western analysts today stretch the verses beyond their mean and don't accept the verses at face value. And this is basically pretzeling the text. We need to look at what the text really says. And the other place, you can go to Zechariah chapter 9, verse 13. I will raise your sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece. You look at the Hebrew, against your sons, O Yavan, Ionia. Ionia is in Turkey. And if you look at the text of Zechariah chapter 9, verse 13, you will see that the Messiah will be seen over them in that battle. So we can rest assured that this battle exists at the time when Christ is on earth. The question becomes, why is it that in every single text in the Bible, when Christ is on earth fighting, and nations are mentioned that he is fighting, they are all Muslims. So this basically dispels the whole notion that Islam must be removed out of the scene before Christ comes. Because when Christ comes, the Antichrist must be on earth. So if the Antichrist is on earth in the appearance of Christ, then those nations are part of the Antichrist kingdom. There's no question about it.
I've got some questions for you about the Antichrist. And Myles, I know you have a question I think that fits in here.
Well, I just wanted to confirm some things that Walid is saying. Even in the Old Testament, in Psalm 83, there's the picture of a war against Israel, a conspiracy that has not yet come in its fullness. And every ancient country mentioned there has a modern name, and they're all the Islamic nations that are surrounding.
I'm glad you brought those verses because it's so crucial. The nations that are mentioned in Psalm 83, some of them are mentioned in Ezekiel 38, and some of them are mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 30, verse 5. In Ezekiel 30, it leaves no question about it. God is dealing with Sudan, Egypt, Libya. Those nations are dealt with also in Ezekiel chapter 38. So this gives gives us a question. Is Ezekiel 38 an event that happens prior to the coming of Antichrist? It can't be, because it says in Ezekiel 38, "Are you not the one regarding Gog, of whom the prophets of old have spoken about? Then the fish of the sea, the birds of the earth, everything on the face of the earth shall shake at my presence." Now there's a question. My presence here. Is this Messiah's presence or not? If it's not, then I guess Zechariah 14, when it says his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. In that day, the Lord will go forth and fight, and in that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. So is his feet Messiah or not? Everybody must agree it's the Messiah. By that, they must also agree that Ezekiel 38 is talking about the Messiah, my presence. Then my fury will show on my face. You know, when does God have a face? That's the face of the Messiah.
Wow. Very, very interesting. Well,
Sharon, if I could just address our audience for a moment, I understand that some of this is very heady and theological and may seem out of the realm of many folks' thinking, but I think that on an emotional level, what's happening is that when Walid speaks these things, there's truth coming forth and there's an offense, because in our Western mindset, we want to do everything we can to think that all people are good people and that all religions are good religions, that all ways lead to God, and that whole way of looking at the world is disputed by the statements of Walid that, in fact, there is an agenda coming through Islam that needs to be addressed, and it's an offense to our American sensibilities.
Yes.
That's a very good point, because if we think it's the same God, then we must go to 1 John 2:22. It lays the rules of Antichrist. It says very clearly, who is the liar? He who denies that Jesus is the Christ. He is Antichrist that denies the Father and the Son. There is no Muslim on the face of the earth that does not deny Father and Son. Whether you consider him moderate, whether you consider him fundamentalist, it does not matter. That in itself discludes Catholics, discludes Jews, discludes anybody else except Islam.
Very interesting. Well, we're going to have to take a break here, and when we come back, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk more about this Antichrist, and we're going to talk about Iran, and also, does Islam in fact want to dominate the world, and does Walid have any insight about how this is going to happen? Stay with us. We'll be right back after this break.
A conservative in San Francisco? You bet.
I want to say that I believe it's essential for all of us to resolve to take our stand in the wave of battles that are raging and will rage both here in our nation and around the world for our families and for our freedom. You know, our families, our liberties, including religious freedom, are under siege. And it's going to take more of us suiting up and rising up and taking our stand in order to win this war.
I so appreciate your radio program. You are out there every day educating people and helping them to find the truth and know what's really going on and what a difference you have made in this world.
Well, thank you.
Won't you help us stay on the air in your area? Just go to changingworldviews.com/donation page or send your donation to Changing Worldviews, P.O. Box 750624, Petaluma, California 94975-0624.
And the wall that the Jews are going to hit now is the Holocaust that is yet to come. And this is a Holocaust that the Muslims are planning here on American soil, and in Canada, and in Mexico, and in Latin America, and in Europe, and all over the world. The Muslims are casing the Jews for ultimate annihilation.
Thanks, everyone, for staying with us today. Co-host Myles Weiss is with me, and we're talking with Walid Shoebat, friend and former PLO terrorist who is really trying to do his part to bring out the truth in regards to this war on terror. His latest book, God's War on Terror. Very interesting discussion. Myles, did you have a question?
I wanted to ask Walid about Geert Wilders, the Dutch member of parliament who is being hounded by Islam now for his movie Fitna, which exposes Islam, and also just because he's come out and said things like quoting Winston Churchill, who compared Mein Kampf, Hitler's memoir, to the Quran. And that is so far from the sensibilities of most Americans. Can you give us a general view of what Sharon was mentioning about Islam's plan to take over the world?
Geert Wilders is absolutely correct, because he lives in Europe and he sees the advancement of Islam in Europe through the revolutionary Islamist movement in his own country. And he's ridiculed a lot by Islamists all over the world. The question I always have is, since when is it, from a Western perspective, illegal to critique critique a religion, because if you look at Europe and America, by far, the critique of Christianity fills our libraries and our bookstores. Why is it that the critique of religion becomes an anathema, that we always throw a sticky label at anybody's forehead that critiques Islam, like Geert Wilders, of being an Islamophobe? Islamophobia has nothing to do with any phobia. If you look at the term Islamophobia, phobia is regarding a fear of something. Can somebody have